Hey, what's up guys? So today I'm going to be installing a 185 degree Mopar thermostat in my 2000 Dodge Viper ACR. So it's a little bit of an involved process. So I have Cometic thermostat housing gaskets, that Mopar 185 degree thermostat that's stock on the 2003 Plus. That's a bird. And I also have Cometic intake manifold gaskets too. So let's get started with that. First things first, I am going to take off the windshield cowl, so this has to come off. So let's take that off, and then we can start removing the bolts that hold on the actual manifold. Alright, I'm going to be cheating a little bit, so I'm not going to be disconnecting any fuel lines or anything like that. I'm just going to prop the manifold up because the thermostat is obviously under here, so it is buried under there. For those of you guys that are new to this, basically you can't get the thermostat housing off without lifting up the intake manifold. So I've also soaked these bolts in PB Blaster because they are known to seize. So I've had those soaking in PB Blaster for a day or two. So there's that part of it. And basically you're going to see these bolts are in there. I don't know if you guys can see that, but right in there there's a bolt, and then also underneath the wire straight through. And it just basically follows that pattern. So a bolt up here, a bolt down there, a bolt up here, a bolt down there, and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to go through, take these off. They do have a Torx bit in the middle if you wanted to go that route, but otherwise it's an 11 mil head bolt. And let's get those off. So I'm actually going to switch to a T30 Torx bit. It's a little bit easier to maneuver in there, and at the same time too, I want to magnetize the bit so that I can actually pull those bolts out without dropping them in there. So if you guys have never done this before, it's an old school trick. You can basically take a magnet. This is just a magnet from one of those parts dishes, and you run it across the tool that you're trying to magnetize, and it'll basically transfer over. So basically what I did was just go like this, swipe the magnet past it a bunch of times. This was not magnetized before, but basically, yeah, it's a magnet now, so you can magnetize almost anything. So I'm gonna use that way I don't drop any of the bolts, and let's keep going. Okay, so as you can see, this is nicely propped up. Basically, you have to unplug this sensor wire. It's right there. The TPS sensor wire, which is here, plugs into the side. And then the best way to disconnect these hoses I found is just to take them off the steel here. So the steel barbs, because they slide off there nicely. I started trying to take it off from the plastic tee, and those things are just mated to each other at this point. So another thing to kind of mention is this car is new to me, so I don't have the full history on it, but some of these intake manifold bolts were literally just sitting there. They weren't even tight, so I don't know if that's maybe they've had it off before and maybe didn't torque them the last time, or maybe that's something to check for on your own. I mean, you don't have to disconnect anything, or it really doesn't take anything for you to inspect those and basically just see if they're torqued, but I'd say almost half of them were barely even tight or in there, so that's something you definitely want to check. So this definitely has lots of room to work. So basically you can see this here, and these gaskets are just going to come off nicely. So this is a pretty easy way to do the thermostat. So as long as everything comes out clean here, you can basically see these gaskets are coming off nicely. Some of you Viper Gyros might know if these are the OEM ones better than I would, but yeah, that basically just came out of there clean. Both mating surfaces are nice and clean, so no scraping to do there, which is nice. So let's see if this one comes off just as easily. Okay, I think this one's going to come off nice as well, which is always a bonus, of course. And the back here, which is, the back is a little bit tighter obviously than the rest. So there we go. Okay, we're back when almost is got clean. Okay. It came out in 2 pieces because this gasket is brittle, but it did come off clean as well. So there is the 2 gaskets, and we will go ahead and probably find a bunch of random stuff that's in this valley after a million years, but let's go ahead and remove this hose. Because you don't technically have to, because the housing isn't going to come off the car, but it might just be nicer just to have things out of the way. But let's see if these bolts crack loose first, actually, before we get too carried away here. Okay, so I did actually wash the car before this, or the engine I should say, just because I wanted to make sure there was no crap that was going to fall into these valleys and into the intake. So I do have a little bit of water in the bottom here, so I'm just going to use this Mighty Vac to kind of suck out the water that's sitting in these valleys, because it doesn't self-drain, or it doesn't appear to anyways. So I'm going to suck that out, and then we'll begin. Okay, so thank God my 3 bolts on this housing actually did crack loose. So I think a combination of the PV blaster soaking on them for a couple nights, that definitely helped. And also I read a tip too where somebody said that if you, they called it wrapping, basically they're tapping really hard on those bolts. So they basically just kind of shook them loose and vibrated. So I did that too. I took basically an extension, probably use something more delicate, but I took an extension, 3/8 extension, put on top of the bolt, and basically just beat on it with a hammer a bit. Nothing too wild or crazy, but enough to basically just shock it. And I also kind of turned it a little bit tighter, so I actually turned the bolts in a clockwise position and then cracked it loose in the counterclockwise. And they all 3 of them seem to come loose. So I think if any of them are gonna crack, some of you guys that have had them crack or break probably would know better, but the front one was a little bit tighter than the other 2 that are over here. So but yeah, they seem to be coming out. So I'm gonna take this hose off before this gets loose, so I can actually take this off, and then we'll continue. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see this. This is basically the remnants. The gasket material is almost turned into dust. I didn't have any leaking outside of this, but this gasket's all kind of baked on here, so definitely gonna have to do some cleanup there. Another thing to mention is a lot of people do change this gasket at the same time, this rubber connection for the PVC, or sorry, PCV, I always get those mixed up, so positive crankcase ventilation. So a lot of people will replace this ground at the same time. If yours is kind of damaged or old looking, I probably could replace it, but I'm not going to at this point. You guys can hate me for that one, but I'm leaving this for now. And this is actually on back order for 2 weeks, so I want to get my car up and running is the main reason. So I'm going to clean this up, and I will show you the other side of the housing too, and what that thermostat looks like. Alright, so here's the other side. This is where the thermostat is in, and this gasket is just million years old and toast. So this should pop out. I might have to pry it and use 2 hands. I don't think I can do it with 1 hand with you guys. One thing I want to show too is these are the 3 bolts that came out of the housing, and I kept them in order. So this one is absolutely covered in PV blaster. You can see it dripping there. So that definitely helped. As far as corrosion wise goes, they weren't the cleanest, but they weren't the dirtiest. And here's the last one. This one wasn't too bad. So these are all in the direction facing the vehicle. So this is the front one, passenger side, and driver's side. I would say the passenger side looks the gnarliest out of all of them. So I don't know how well you can see that, but there definitely is some crud and buildup on there. So I had no issues with them coming out. So I would recommend you do the same. PV blaster on them. 1-2 days. Give them a shot each night, as much as you can. Because I could do it with the manifold on, so I actually just kind of got the straw in there and did it and left it, and then do that wrapping thing on them, basically just putting something on there, tapping really hard just to kind of shake them up a little bit, and maybe just break through any corrosion or mating that they did with the aluminum, between the aluminum and the steel. So those are those. I'm gonna get things cleaned up, and then we'll start assembling. Okay, so we got our mating surfaces all clean, so you definitely want to spend some time getting this surface clean, both scraping off that gasket. That gasket's going to be a pain in the ass to scrape off, but make sure you scrape it all off. I mean, there's a few different ways to do it, but if you've done it before and you're experienced enough, You can take a flat razor and basically just follow the surface of the metal, but if you've never done that before, I wouldn't recommend it because it's pretty easy to mess things up. But that is probably the most effective way, if you know what you're doing, is to use a flat razor against the metal surface and just be scraping the gasket material and nothing else. No shavings, nothing of that sort. So that's all cleaned up. I have this gasket here. So this is the Cometic gasket for the housing. There's the part number for anybody that's interested. So that's the part number, EC17710332AFM. So that's that one. I've also have my housing cleaned up here. It's a little bit dark because I'm working at night, but that housing is cleaned up, so that's ready to go. One other thing to mention too is if you're in a pinch like I am, these bolts here, I would recommend replacing them if you manage to get them out clean. If you're in a hurry like I am, all the manifold bolts, the ones that hold on the intake manifold, they're the exact same as those housing bolts. And also the throttle bodies are the same. So what I did was just, without breaking the gasket, just basically steal one from here, steal one from the other side, and I just basically stole a couple of them, or actually 3 of them, and made them easily accessible here so that I can run to Dodge, replace these as needed. I mean, there's nothing wrong with them, but with the heat cycling that's involved in this area, they might be a little bit compromised, so that's something you can do as well. Another added step that I am going to do is, I don't want to have to be messing with this at all, but I'm going to use this gasket maker too in conjunction with the Cometic gasket. Like I said, some people might think it's overkill, unnecessary, but it's something that I'm just going to do. I'm not going to go crazy with it, but just a light kind of film on top of this gasket just to seal it perfectly so that I don't have to worry about any issues. Like I said, it might be overkill, but I'm going to do it anyways. It's not going to hurt anything, and it's just going to give me peace of mind when I put this big manifold back on that I don't have any leaks or anything. So I'm going to get this stuff all sorted out and continue. Another thing is, last but certainly not least, is this is the Mopar thermostat that I'm going to use. So this is the newer thermostat out of the 03 Plus model. So it's the exact same. You guys can use it as well. I don't want to mess around with using aftermarket thermostats because, like I said, it's kind of buried in there, so I don't want to put an aftermarket one in there and have it fail or whatnot. At least the Mopar one is reliable. So if you look here, it says, I don't know if you guys can see that, but it is 185 degrees instead of the 195. Yeah, you can probably see right on the bottom. So this one's a 185, so it's 10 degrees cooler than the one that actually came stock in the, I guess, Gen 2s. So this one's gonna go in as well and give me peace of mind and a slightly lower operating temperature, hopefully. So let's get this installed. Okay, so the thermostat is installed and the housing is tight, and now I'm going to go ahead and put the new Cometic intake manifold gaskets on. If you're looking for a part number, here's the part number, C5827039. And one thing you want to take note of is you're going to see on the original OEM gaskets these little tabs, kind of push clips here. So this is one removed. Basically what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to transfer these over to the new gaskets. You could probably buy new ones, but they don't really do much outside of just basically hold the gasket in place while you put the bolts in. So basically to get the old ones out, just tear the gasket like this and the old one comes out, and then you're ready to transfer it just by doing that. So tear all these out, tear the old gasket, it doesn't take much force, just like that, pop this out, and you're ready to transfer it to the new one. So the last one here, and that's it. So I got my 4 clips. We'll install those in the gasket, lay the gaskets on, and we're ready to put the intake manifold back on.
And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Alright, so the intake is installed and torqued down. It is a bit of a bitch to get all these bolts tightened, just to try to find an arrangement of extensions and whatnot that can fit through here. 1/4 inch stuff seems to work the best. The only other thing to do once you get this tightened down, another thing I want to mention when you do tighten it down is make sure the gaskets don't shift at all when you put this on. So I did find when I placed this down, even though there's the peg on opposing ends that holds that gasket in place, the center or the middle of the gasket on each side had a tendency to kind of sag a little bit. So before you start cranking stuff in, double check your gasket didn't sag in the middle like mine did. And it's not that it sags per se, but when you put the intake on, it kind of pushes it, and depending on if you landed, one of the sides landed first, it might drag the gasket down a bit. So I did find that. But other than that, that's pretty much it. Only other thing is to basically install the clips and stuff that you removed. So there's this plug that has to be plugged back in. These hoses, which are straightforward. These hoses just slide on, so attach these four there, and then also your throttle position sensor here. Easy enough, that just clicks on. And these ones aren't too bad. Maybe you could probably replace these hoses if you wanted to, if your car was a little bit older. Mine kind of feel a little bit rock hard or plastic, but they do seem to be doing the trick. There's that one and the top one, so these ones just slide on. But yeah, I would definitely remove them from here as opposed to trying to take them out of anywhere else, just because getting the rubber hose off these barbs is a little bit simpler than trying to remove this plastic connection or anything like that in the middle. So that's that. This is on, and that's basically it, guys. So the thermostat's done. If you haven't already seen it, for my rad replacement video, I'll link that one as well below. So the rad replacement, how to get that removed and back installed. And also I have another video on how to change the radiator hoses and flush the coolant, which is another video which I'll post as well in the link in the description below. So that's it, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video, and check back for more videos.
What we do here is go back.